Elizabeth Howard gently caressed her belly as she sat at her office desk. While the movement of her 7-month pregnancy brought her small moments of joy, she had been increasingly concerned about her husband Richard's attitude lately. The green property sold for an amazing price. "You're our top seller again this month," her colleague Martha smiled as she handed over some documents. At Silver Valley Real Estate, Elizabeth's name had become legendary. Her negotiation skills and attentive customer service consistently closed deals on luxury properties, making her the company's poster girl. "Thank you, Martha," Elizabeth returned a tired smile. "But I should start preparing for my maternity leave soon." Looking at the clock, she saw it was past 7 in the evening. Still no word from Richard. Lately, he didn't even send messages saying, "I'll be late" anymore. On her drive home from downtown Boston's high-rises to their suburban house, Elizabeth recalled their wedding from 2 years ago. Meeting Richard, who was successful as a vice president at a major investment firm, had been like something out of a movie. She had fallen for his intelligence, sincerity, and his respect for her career, convinced that this is what true love is. After parking her car in the garage and entering the quiet house, a familiar loneliness enveloped her. Looking at the ultrasound photo pinned to the refrigerator, Elizabeth whispered softly, "Mommy is always with you. And Daddy really wants to meet you too, I'm sure." Just then, she heard the front door open. "Richard?" "Oh, you're home," her husband's voice showed no surprise or pleasure. The office was busy. Richard barely brushed her cheek in a pretend kiss before heading straight to the bar counter in the living room. Elizabeth tried to ignore the unfamiliar perfume scent on his shirt. "You're home early tonight. Shall we have dinner?" She created a cheerful voice. "I already ate." Richard picked up a whiskey glass, adding, "with a client meeting." Elizabeth took a deep breath, suppressing her anxiety. "By the way, can you come with me to next week's checkup? We might find out the baby's gender." "I have an important meeting that day." "Sorry," Richard answered without meeting her eyes. "I understand," Elizabeth nodded slightly. This was the third broken promise. The next morning, as Elizabeth was preparing breakfast, the phone rang. Carol, Richard's mother, appeared on the screen. Their relationship had always been cold. Carol was a prominent figure in Boston's social circles, serving on boards of charitable organizations and cultural institutions, known for her cold perfectionism. In her eyes, Elizabeth, who came from a middle-class family and built her career on her own, was not good enough for her son. "Good morning, Carol," Elizabeth answered brightly. "Elizabeth, how's the baby?" Carol's voice was perfectly refined, but Elizabeth couldn't help feeling the coldness beneath it. "Doing well, thank you." "Wonderful. I'm calling today about the baby shower." Carol spoke carefully, choosing her words. "I'd like to host it." Elizabeth was stunned into silence. She never expected Carol to make such an offer. "Well, thank you. But I've already planned a small party with my friends." "No, I will host it." Carol's voice was gentle yet resolute. "This is the first grandchild in the Richard family. As a family tradition, the Howard women have always hosted baby showers. Everyone in our social circle is looking forward to it." Elizabeth hesitated. While suspicious about what lay behind this offer, she thought it might be an opportunity to improve relations with her mother-in-law. "All right, Carol. Thank you." That night, when Elizabeth told Richard about Carol's offer, he looked at her properly for the first time in a while. "Mother wants to get along with you," he smiled. "You know what she's like. Once she makes up her mind, she doesn't change it. Please accept this opportunity." While Elizabeth felt reassured by her husband's smile, she couldn't shake a vague uneasiness deep inside. That night, Richard gently embraced her body and whispered, "Everything will be fine." In this rare moment of intimacy, she wanted to believe things were returning to normal. Carol's mansion in Beacon Hill, an upscale residential area in suburban Boston, had a special glow that day. Colorful balloons danced in the front yard of the 19th-century-style mansion, with baby shower banners swaying in the breeze. Elizabeth parked her car and took a deep breath. Dressed in a vibrant blue maternity dress, she gently cradled her 7-month belly with both hands. "It's okay. Today is a special day," she whispered, as if speaking to her unborn child. Carol stood at the entrance with a perfect hostess face. Dressed in a champagne-colored two-piece outfit, her platinum hair was severely styled in an updo. "Elizabeth, you're late." "Everyone is waiting," Carol said curtly, giving her a cold kiss on the cheek. "Please, come in." The moment she stepped inside, Elizabeth gasped. More people than she had imagined had gathered. About 50 elegant men and women were gracefully sipping champagne. All of them were Carol's acquaintances or relatives. Not a single one of Elizabeth's friends or colleagues was present. "Everyone, our guest of honor has arrived." Carol's voice echoed through the room. At that moment, all eyes focused on Elizabeth. Despite the congratulatory words flying around, she tried to smile but couldn't feel any genuine warmth in those gazes. "Elizabeth," a glamorous voice came from behind her. Turning around, she saw Rebecca Finch, Richard's colleague, standing there. Her thin pink dress fit perfectly, and her golden hair fell in waves over her shoulders. "Congratulations. Today is your special day," her smile seemed somehow calculated. "Thank you, Rebecca," Elizabeth responded politely. She knew Rebecca and Richard were close. They worked long hours together and often traveled on business trips. But somehow, Rebecca's presence today created an unsettling feeling within her. "Is Richard here yet?" Elizabeth asked Carol. "Oh, my son will be a bit late. He had a work call," Carol said and quickly returned to her guests. The baby shower proceeded according to schedule. During gift exchange time, mountain-high expensive presents from Carol's friends were piled up. Golden child spoons, cashmere blankets, and luxurious baby clothes that made one wonder who would use them. Elizabeth thanked each one carefully, but her feeling of loneliness grew. "Now it's time for a mother's wishes," Carol announced, taking the microphone. "Elizabeth, please come up here." Standing on a small platform in one corner of the room, Elizabeth could see the entire venue. Elegantly dressed women, and some men. Their faces showed curiosity and something else, a kind of expectation. "Dear friends," Carol began speaking into the microphone. "Today is a blessed day as we welcome a new life into our family. The first child of my son Richard and his wife Elizabeth." Her voice sounded emotional, but her eyes remained cold. At that moment, a commotion arose at the entrance. Richard had finally arrived, late. He gave Elizabeth a glance and headed toward the stage. His face showed an unusual tension. "As you all know, the Howard family has been Boston's pride for generations," Carol continued. "And today, a new life is being added to that tradition. Elizabeth, let's bless the new member of our family." As Elizabeth was searching for words, suddenly a voice boomed from the back of the venue. "Wait." It was Richard's voice. "This show is over." The atmosphere in the room froze. Richard strode toward the stage with large steps. His eyes had a coldness Elizabeth had never seen before. "That child is not mine." Richard's voice resonated throughout the entire venue. "She deceived me." Elizabeth caught her breath and stood frozen. Her mind went blank, and she couldn't speak. The venue buzzed with shock. "No way. Unbelievable. She didn't seem like that kind of person." Amid the whispers, Carol smiled quietly. That smile had a tinge of victory. "Now we can officially remove you from the family," she whispered in Elizabeth's ear. Her voice was as cold as ice. Elizabeth covered her face with trembling hands. For a moment, she felt as if the world was crumbling beneath her. But in the next moment, something changed within her. She quietly wiped away the tears that had welled up in her eyes and slowly stood up. It was a moment of clarity. "I see," Elizabeth murmured to herself. So this was their plan all along. With all eyes in the venue fixed on her, Elizabeth pulled out an envelope from the bodice of her dress. It wasn't something she had prepared specifically for today. This was something she had been carrying with her for several weeks. "Allow me to offer my own surprise." Elizabeth's voice was quiet but reached everyone in the venue. Time seemed to stand still. Carol's triumphant expression froze, and the color drained from Richard's face. In the corner of the room, Rebecca trembled slightly. Elizabeth held up the envelope. Her eyes were clear, and her voice was filled with unwavering confidence. "Everyone, thank you for gathering here today. On this special day, I'd like to share the truth with all of you." Everyone in the venue held their breath, waiting for her next words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elizabeth's voice was quiet yet somehow reached every corner of the room. "Thank you for coming today. I had no intention of revealing the truth in this way before you all. But today's events have changed everything." Her gaze momentarily turned to Richard. His face showed agitation, anger, and above all, fear. Carol stood with her arms crossed, still looking at her son as if expecting some kind of reversal. "First, I want to tell everyone that the child in my womb is undeniably Richard Howard's child," Elizabeth began matter-of-factly. "That will become clear with the evidence I'm about to show. But before that, let me tell you why I have this envelope." Elizabeth surveyed the room. The initially hostile gazes had now changed to curiosity and confusion. She slowly took the glass of water placed on a small table and took a sip. "For several months, I noticed that my husband was acting strangely," she continued. "Richard started coming home late, and our conversations decreased. The man who had been so happy about my pregnancy gradually grew cold." Carol cleared her throat. "Elizabeth, discussing personal issues here is." "No, Carol," Elizabeth said calmly but firmly. "You set up this venue, didn't you? To share the truth?" Carol fell silent, and Richard shifted his legs in apparent irritation. "At first, I thought it was work stress," Elizabeth continued. "I also considered that hormone changes from pregnancy might be making me oversensitive. But the late-night messages frequently arriving on my husband's phone, unexplained expenses, and above all, the guilt in his eyes. These couldn't be ignored." The atmosphere in the venue began to shift. The guests' gazes turned to Richard. He fidgeted nervously in his chair. "It happened 3 months ago," Elizabeth continued. "While I was resting in bed, a notification sounded on Richard's phone. He was in the shower and didn't notice. Out of simple curiosity, I looked at the screen." She took a deep breath. There was a message saying, "Tonight was amazing. When can we meet again?" The sender was listed as a R. I got. Richard's face turned pale. Whispers began to ripple through the venue. "The more I investigated, the more puzzling things became," Elizabeth continued, placing her hand on her growing belly. "Despite being pregnant, I began to search for answers, who my husband was spending time with and why he was lying to me." Elizabeth slowly took out a photograph from the envelope. She didn't show it to anyone, just looked at it herself, confirming it. "And finally, I discovered the truth." Her gaze moved from Carol to Richard, and then to a woman standing at the back of the venue. That Richard and Rebecca were meeting at the Bridgeport Hotel. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Always in the same room, always spending 2 to 3 hours. Rebecca Finch's face contorted. She turned pale and tried to head for the exit. "Don't run away, Rebecca," Elizabeth said quietly. "You're an important character in this story too." Rebecca stopped in her tracks, lowering her gaze to the floor. The entire venue was holding its breath. "But this is not just a story of infidelity," Elizabeth continued. "If that were all, I wouldn't be telling you this in front of everyone. The issue is the conspiracy that was uncovered because of it." Richard suddenly stood up. "Elizabeth, stop it now." His voice trembled with anger. Elizabeth looked at him and smiled sadly. "I can't stop, Richard. You started this." And then she began speaking to the people in the venue again. "I hired a private investigator. They're professionals who could use digital forensic technology to recover Richard's deleted emails and text messages." Carol now tried to interrupt, genuinely flustered. "This is completely inappropriate. Someone stop this woman." But all the guests seemed eager to hear the truth. Many in the social circle who had long been weary of Carol Howard's arrogant attitude were riveted by this unexpected turn of events. "What I discovered wasn't just evidence of an affair," Elizabeth continued. "There was a detailed plan to drive me out of the house, cut off my relationship with my child, and take all my assets." She now took out another paper from the envelope. "This is a transcript of a conversation between Richard and Rebecca recorded 3 weeks ago. Location, Bridgeport Hotel." Quoting Richard, "Mother's plan is perfect. If I announce at the baby shower that the child isn't mine, Elizabeth will be banished from society. In the divorce trial, we can claim her infidelity. The custody and all property will be mine." Complete silence once again dominated the hall. Elizabeth looked at Richard. And Rebecca answered, "But what if DNA tests show it's really your child?" Elizabeth continued. "Richard's response is this: Mother says it's possible to bribe the judge. Besides, if we claim Elizabeth's mental state is unstable, her words won't be trusted." The color drained from Carol's face. Her features contorted beneath her perfect makeup. "In other words, today's baby shower was a trap to humiliate me in front of society, destroy my reputation, and take everything from me." Elizabeth's voice no longer held anger, just calm determination. "The plan was to invite me here, have Richard say the child isn't his, and expose me as an unfaithful woman before you all." She opened the envelope, preparing to take out its contents. "What I'm about to show you is the evidence I've gathered. Evidence of conspiracy by Richard Howard, Rebecca Finch, and Carol Howard." Elizabeth surveyed the venue one last time. The expressions of the guests who had once looked at her coldly had changed. Now there was shock and sympathy, and she felt a bit of satisfaction, anger toward Carol and Richard. "Now, let me show you the truth," Elizabeth said. Her voice was quiet yet powerful. Elizabeth's hand reached into the envelope and pulled out a document. Her pearl ring reflected the light, and the slight trembling of her hand was visible. It came not from fear, but from controlled anger. "This is the DNA test I took last month," Elizabeth announced, holding up the certificate. "This child is undoubtedly Richard Howard's. Results obtained from 3 reliable, independent laboratories." The venue began buzzing again. Richard turned pale and collapsed into his chair. Carol glanced at her son and seemed to be hurriedly thinking of an excuse. "But that's not all," Elizabeth continued. She took out the next document from the envelope. "This is a summary of email exchanges between Richard and Rebecca. The dates start from March this year, when I was 5 months pregnant." She put on her glasses and began reading in a clear voice. "Mother has come up with an idea. A way to get rid of Elizabeth. At the baby shower, I'll pretend I've been deceived and claim the child isn't mine. If we humiliate her in front of Mother's friends, she'll never show her face in society again. As Richard's words echoed, several guests began to stand up from their chairs. And Rebecca's reply, Elizabeth continued. But it really is your child, isn't it? What about DNA tests? She turned the page and continued reading. Test results can be manipulated. Mother has connections with judges. What's important is public humiliation. Once that happens, no one will believe her claims. Carol was now completely flustered. She stood up and cried, "This is all fabrication. Don't believe any of it." But Elizabeth ignored her and pulled out the next piece of evidence. These are receipts from the Bridgeport Hotel. Evidence that Richard and Rebecca met regularly. She held up copies of multiple receipts with dates. Same room, same time period. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to ruin me. Angry voices began to rise from the venue. Women in the social circle who had been pushed around by Carol for years were indignant at her son's despicable plan. But the most shocking evidence is this. Elizabeth pulled out a small recorder. This is a conversation between Richard and Carol that I obtained through my private investigator. She pressed the button. The first voice to echo in the room was Richard's. "Mother, do you really think this plan will work? Elizabeth still has friends." "Son, that woman's friends are just middle-class people," Carol's cold voice replied. "In our society, she has no allies. If we humiliate her at the baby shower, her reputation will be ruined. Then the trial will proceed in our favor. If I say this child isn't mine, I can divorce without property division. You were keen on that idea, weren't you?" Richard's voice continued. "Perfect. Ever since that woman got pregnant, I've been waiting for this day. She was never suitable for our family from the beginning. An upstart from the middle class carrying on the Howard bloodline." Elizabeth stopped the recording. The venue was enveloped in complete silence. "As you can see," she continued quietly, "from the day I became pregnant, Carol was planning to drive me out. And Richard, using his relationship with Rebecca, participated in that plan." Elizabeth took out the final document. "This is the divorce petition prepared by my lawyer. All evidence of infidelity and conspiracy is complete. I demand compensation, property division, and full custody." She held up the document. "All your plans have failed." Richard stood up, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Elizabeth, let's talk. This is all a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Elizabeth laughed coldly. "Your own recorded voice is a misunderstanding? The emails? The hotel receipts? You see your conspiracy, planned over months, crumble in just 1 hour, and now you call it a misunderstanding?" Carol rushed to Richard's side. "Son, call the lawyer. This is illegal evidence collection." Elizabeth shook her head sadly. "It's all legal, Carol. My private investigator is a former FBI agent. He collected all the evidence legally." She turned back to the guests. "Everyone, thank you for coming today. I will leave now." But no one thing. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around her belly. "As a mother, I will do anything to protect this child. This isn't mere revenge. This is a fight for my child's future." After a spreading silence, applause suddenly started from one woman. She appeared to be an elegant elderly lady who was a longtime friend of Carol's. She stood up and said, "You are very brave." Then another woman stood up, and another, and another. Finally, most of the guests in the venue stood up and applauded Elizabeth. She was surprised at the sight and had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she bowed slightly. Rebecca covered her face with both hands and hurried toward the exit. Her flustered figure now lacked any grace. Richard was confused and began to assert his rights as a father, but no one was paying attention to him. Carol's face twisted with anger and humiliation. "This isn't over," she grabbed her son's arm and said in a low voice. "Call the lawyer. Do you think we'll lose this easily?" Elizabeth heard their conversation and smiled. "Actually, there's one more thing I haven't told everyone." The venue grew quiet again. "The major shareholder of my company, Silver Valley Real Estate, is actually the Howard Investment Group," she revealed. "Richard, that's your company. Most of the luxury properties I've sold were sold to your company's investors. In other words, you're about to lose your biggest source of revenue." Richard's face turned pale. He seemed to finally understand the gravity of the situation. "Go ahead and call your lawyer," Elizabeth continued. "But before you do, think about this. If this matter becomes public, what will happen to Howard Investment Group's reputation?" Carol finally appeared to be at a loss for words. She could feel her perfect social standing crumbling before her eyes. Elizabeth quietly descended from the platform and headed for the door. The people in the venue made way for her. No one tried to stop her. "My lawyer will contact your lawyer," she turned back and said to Richard and Carol. "Both of you, have a good day." Elizabeth opened the door and stepped outside, seeking fresh air. The sunlight illuminated her face, and she took a deep breath. This was the beginning of a new life. On a soft spring afternoon with sunshine pouring over the quiet residential area in Boston's suburbs, Elizabeth was drinking coffee on the garden veranda, holding her 3-month-old daughter Sophia in her arms. Listening to the baby's gentle breathing, she reflected on the turbulent past year and new beginnings. A year had passed since the shocking events at the baby shower. The divorce proceeded more smoothly than expected. To avoid scandal, Richard and Carol accepted most of Elizabeth's terms. She gained full custody and secured ample compensation and property division. It was more than enough for her to start a new life. Elizabeth's reputation at Silver Valley Real Estate had grown with her strength and integrity in the face of adversity. She had been promoted to partner and formed her own team. Now, her name was a symbol of trust and success in the real estate industry. "Elizabeth, mail has arrived," her mother Mary came into the garden with a package. Mary had moved from Florida after her grandchild's birth to support her daughter. "Thank you, Mom," Elizabeth smiled as she took the package. It was Boston Business Weekly magazine. Her photo was prominently featured on the cover. The headline read, "This year's most influential woman entrepreneur." "I'm proud of you," Mary placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. The phone rang, and when Elizabeth looked at the screen, an unexpected name appeared. Carol Howard. Elizabeth hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Elizabeth, Carol's voice had lost its former arrogance. "May I speak with you?" "Go ahead," Elizabeth answered calmly. I want to meet Sophia," Carol's voice trembled. "I was wrong. About everything." Silence flowed. Elizabeth gazed at her sleeping daughter's face. "It won't be easy, Carol," she finally said. "But if you never betray us again, I might consider building a relationship gradually. Sophia needs a grandmother." From the other end of the phone came the sound of Carol's sobbing. Tears of true remorse for the first time. Meanwhile, Richard's downfall had been swift. He ended his relationship with Rebecca and began drowning in alcohol. Having lost his position at the investment company, he had become a shadow of his former self. As Elizabeth held her daughter in her arms and gazed at the flowers in the garden, a gentle breeze caressed her cheek. This was the path she had chosen. Not revenge, but a path of truth and integrity. And that path had led her to unexpected success and an inner strength she had never known before. Mommy will always protect you, she kissed the sleeping Sophia. And I'll teach you that truth always prevails. The spring sunlight embraced mother and child, and there lay the promise of a new life.